So, my name is Melissa Sterry, and I am the campaign manager for Alden Smith for Congress. And a couple of months back, when I first started working on the campaign, Mr. Smith kept telling me about this professor of his that I had to meet and how he really wanted this professor involved with his campaign. And I'm going, well, yeah, okay, we'll work on it, good. And then he proceeds to tell me about Dr. William Moomaw. I'm going, okay, all right, well, all right, he's an environmentalist, that's great, he's written some wonderful papers, okay, cool, that's nice. All right, well, you know, he's a scientist guy, I'm not quite sure how much traction we're going to get out of it, but okay, all right, I'll work on it. And then I Googled you and went, oh, this is kind of interesting. You see, Dr. William Moomaw is the lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He's been the principal author 5 times for that organization that is attached to the United Nations. Wow, okay, that's kind of cool. See, I went to a small liberal arts women's college in the middle of Missouri, and you know, we're just not around people like this. All right, and then I'm starting to write about Dr. Moomaw, and then I do a little more research, and I come across this obscure little article about Doctor receiving the bicentennial medal from his alma mater, Williams College. And oh, by the way, he's a Nobel laureate. And I pick up the phone and I call Alden and I go, really? Dr. Moomaw? Nobel Prize? Nobel Peace Prize? You didn't think to tell me that when you started the conversation? Yep. So it is my esteemed pleasure to announce that I am officially a Dr. William Moomaw groupie. I have watched his speech at Williams College more times than I can embarrassingly admit. I have enjoyed this gentleman's company. I have enjoyed his conversation. I have found that he is one of the most accessible scientists I have ever had the pleasure to sit down with. Dr. Moomaw is going to discuss a variety of things with you, and at the end, you will be able to ask him questions the same way I have enjoyed asking him questions. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. William Moomaw.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Very generous introduction. The fact that Alden failed to mention certain things about me just is a tribute to what he sees as significant. After all, the Nobel Prize was given to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but it was only for peace. Right? What can I say? Thank you for inviting me. I met Alden. He showed up in my class after leaving the Navy. He decided, for some strange reason, that he wanted to go to graduate school, and that graduate school would be the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, which is basically a graduate school that deals with international issues. And I don't know what extent, sort of where his interest in international came from, but he's been in a lot of international places, having been in the Navy, and even Korea, we just learned. And the course I was teaching was about these massive environmental problems that we're facing in the world. Everything from these have local effects here in Maine. I mean, the loss of fisheries, for example. It's not just happening in the Gulf of Maine, it's happening all over the world. It's estimated that 90% of the big fish in the oceans are gone. Right? Staggering. Why is that? That's the purpose of this course. Let's try to explore this. Why is this happening? Forests disappearing from all over the world. Something like 15 billion acres of grasslands degraded around the world. And oh yes, did I mention that we're changing the climate, right? We're changing the whole climate of the whole planet. We started off just degrading the ozone layer that protects us from the sun's ultraviolet radiation, but we've begun to address that, and we're actually getting purchase of it. It's not growing, it's not getting worse. It's actually started to get better. It'll be 50 years before we're back to where we were before we started putting chemicals in the atmosphere that destroyed it, but we acted, and we acted in time. And so the great thing about having Alden in class, I didn't know, he didn't tell me important things like he was running for Congress. And so we talk about politics and its role, and we talk about what's happening. And one day he comes up to me and he said, can I talk to you about something? I said, yeah, sure. He said, I've decided I'm going to run for Congress. I said, and pursue a graduate degree at the same time? I don't think that's possible. And he agreed. And so he's withdrawing from graduate school in order to, in good standing, let me just add that.
Leave of absence.
A leave of absence. I will be back. That's right. It's a leave of absence in good standing. He'll be back. And so we had a number of conversations. As I talked to him, I was impressed by his motivations for running for Congress. I mean, all of us, I think, are just despair at what has happened to the U.S. Congress over the past few years. It is really, really appalling. The inability to get things done, the kind of partisan sniping and so forth that goes on, and it's really, and to me, the most as a scientist, to have something like close to 180 members of Congress from a particular political party sign a statement saying they did not believe in climate change. To me, it's like saying, I don't believe in gravity. And it's not a question of belief. It either is or it isn't. And unfortunately, climate change is happening. Now, it's a little awkward speaking in Maine about climate change, often referred to as global warming, when we've just had this incredible cold spell in January of 2014. But even that is connected to climate change. There's a lot of work now. In fact, we're going to have a conference on the Arctic in about a month. And one of the people there from Rutgers University has demonstrated that what is actually happening, why do we get these long spells? It used to be, whatever happened to the January thaw that we always got in New England? What's happened is we've changed the whole way in which the jet stream works. It now moves further south and further north. And it used to be a big S curve that kind of rotated around the Earth. It now gets stuck. So if you look at a map, you see this big, if it's in color, this big blue area in the middle of low temperatures. And I just had a former student from Iceland come visit me this past week. And she said, man, it's cold in Boston. And I said, really? I said, what's it like in Iceland? She said, well, in Reykjavik the other day, it was 60 degrees. Wow. Well, what's happened is the southern dip is now up over Iceland, and the northern dip is all through the middle of the United States. And where did that come from? Well, it comes from the fact that we have changed the planet so that the Arctic ice has melted every summer, half of it in 2012. That's never happened before in any time that we know of. And what that means is, if you think about this, the air over ice is the temperature of the ice. Air over water is the temperature of the water. Water is not colder than 32 degrees. Air over ice can be minus 30 degrees. So that air is warmer. And what happens is, as it flows down the planet, because it's denser than the air at lower latitudes, it's no longer as dense as it was. So the whole jet stream, which is the manifestation of that, is dramatically changed. So it is ironically global warming that has led to the ice age that we've been experiencing here in the Northeast over the past month or so. It seems very, very strange, but it really is the case. It's all connected. Sea level rise. The Maine coast is, the coast of New England, and particularly of Maine, will see sea level rise that is perhaps 3 times greater than sea level rise averaged over the world. Wait a minute. I thought the sea was level. That's why we call it sea level. But in fact, ocean currents and all sorts of things change where the sea level is at any given point. And the way that all of this works together, we are seeing sea level rising faster along the New England coast than we are almost any place else in the world. Actually, the whole Atlantic coast is seeing an additional rise, and I'm struck by the fact that the North Carolina legislature voted recently, about a year ago, to forbid coastal planning agencies along the North Carolina coast from considering sea level rise due to global warming in their planning for the future. Because, by law, climate change is not happening in North Carolina. I mean, this is just how crazy politics has gotten. And we clearly need some new rationality and some people with the right values to be in the Congress. Don't worry, I'm not going to send you to the North Carolina legislature. That's not the point. But the point is that there are actually people in legislative positions who are trying to legislate these very strange things. It's like, what was it, King Canute, who commanded the seas not to come ashore. It's a little hard to do even if you're the king. You just can't do it. We're all experiencing the problems of this. While we were freezing, Australia was cooking. They had to stop the Australian Tennis Open for 2 days because temperatures were well over 100 degrees at a time of year when that is rare in that part of Australia. And remember, Southern Hemisphere is just the opposite in seasons of Northern Hemisphere. So basically, we have a certain amount of heat on the planet, and it gets redistributed in different ways in different seasons, and that accounts for an awful lot of what we see. I mean, after all, it does get to be winter in New England, and it's colder, and it gets to be summer, and it gets warmer, but it's the average trends that we're looking at that are the problem. We do not have a national policy on climate change. We have a number of state policies that are actually quite good. California, Massachusetts, Oregon, Maine is part of the the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is an agreement among all the northeastern states to reduce the amount of the emissions of carbon dioxide from power plants by a certain percentage by certain dates. The original date was 2016. We achieved that in 2012. So now it's been cranked up. Revenues that come in from this have been used in several of the northeastern states to pay for energy audits, to subsidize insulating our homes and so forth, which is why in New England we're actually seeing a reduction in our total energy use, in our home heating bills, and in our heat trapping gas emissions. It's working. It's really working. Unfortunately, one new governor decided he did not want to play this game. That's Governor Christie. He pulled out. Even though it was in the economic interest of New Jersey because, well, I don't know why. I don't attribute causal things to people like that. But anyway, he was maybe trying to make a point of some sort. So we need to get beyond that. And in 2007, I was part of a group of 50 scientists who worked on a report called Climate Change in the Northeast, and looked at everything that is happening and everything that is likely to happen. And we did it state by state, so you could actually see what was happening. The things that were disturbing about Maine were that the fisheries are going to continue to decline, just because the oceans are getting warmer and they're becoming more acidic as carbon dioxide dissolves in the oceans. 2007, here we are, 6, 7 years later. I don't see a counter trend. I don't see it going the other way. The fisheries are still declining, not just because of climate change, obviously. It's a mismanagement of fisheries. It's a whole range of things coming together. But the truth of it is it's our fault. We as people have been mismanaging that resource. I don't know whether this is, this must have made the newspapers up here, but there's been a dramatic decline in moose across the northern tier. Imagine, how could there be a decline in moose? I mean, there's always been moose in Maine. But numbers, you know, in some areas have declined by to half in only a few years, 5 or 6 years. And it appears that what's happening is we've had a lot of warmer winters. Ticks are just rampant. Ticks are sucking these animals dry. They are incapable of making it through the winter in many cases. And this is true all the way across Canada and across the northern part of the United States. I mean, all sorts of things that we just sort of assume are part of our natural inheritance are disappearing with a combination of climate change and our mismanagement of resources. Now, there is some good news. We have, for example, coal is the biggest producer of heat-trapping gases, coal-burning power plants. And the United States has reduced from 51% of our electricity being generated by coal in 2005 to 39% last year. The United States last year added more wind and solar energy in 1 year. Well, I shouldn't say more, it's only 93% as much, almost as much as we had in place when the year started. It's an amazing, amazing change. The largest addition to new power generation in the United States last year was solar energy. Second largest was wind. The third largest was natural gas. But we are using more natural gas than that because we're converting old coal plants to burn this glut of natural gas that's coming from fracking. You know, natural gas can be a useful fuel, but we're producing it in a way that is really destructive. We don't have to produce it that destructively. We can get the benefits from it without the damage. And yes, it would cost a little bit more. It's already cheaper than coal. It would still be cheaper than coal. Why don't we just spend the little bit extra that we need in order to do it right? I'm not asking for anything very radical here. It's just, let's change the law that the Congress passed that said you cannot prosecute a gas fracker for polluting the waters of the United States. Totally takes it out of the Clean Water Act. You cannot prosecute them for polluting the air. Takes it totally out of the Clean Air Act. There's just too much of this kind of very special legislation which benefits a very narrow group of individuals and companies and undermines the potential of other companies that could be providing us with really good, low pollution, low climate causing energy sources. And I think one of the things that, by the way, I've never supported a student for Congress before. I haven't had very many of them either, but nevertheless, as I talked to Alden, and it was not only on environmental issues, it was on energy issues, it was on a whole range of social issues, it was on healthcare, it was on a whole range of things. He seemed to me to have thought these issues through and to see a way forward that will be productive, responsible, financially responsible. He is going to look at the evidence. He has not accepted money from special interests that would send him off in some strange direction. I mean, you look at the direction some of these politicians go, and you just have to ask yourself, okay, where's the envelope that cash came in? It's just absolutely astounding to see how badly they're doing that. And I think I'd just like to appeal to all of you to do as I have and support Alden and his campaign. And let me just close by saying to his parents, I think you've done a wonderful job in raising a fine young man. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Alden Smith, and I am a Democratic candidate for United States Congress for Maine 2nd District. I want to thank you all for joining me here tonight, especially on a Friday night. I'd like to thank the Senator in for graciously hosting this event, my staff for putting all the hard work in to make this actually happen, but most importantly, I want to thank all the volunteers who have been working tirelessly on this campaign for the last few weeks. Especially, however, I'd like to thank Dr. William Moomaw for taking time out of his busy schedule and joining us here. I'd like to thank him for sharing his kind remarks and, more importantly, sharing his vision for a more just and sustainable world. We are all indebted to his work on climate change, his long and celebrated career at the Fletcher School for Law and Diplomacy, where he educated generations of global leaders in the methods of sustainable development, sustainable diplomacy that are needed to resolve challenges and conflicts over resources worldwide, has set a standard that will be the standard we all should strive to achieve. And so, while Fletcher might not have the flashiest name amongst its peers or its competitors, I guarantee you that its faculty, its alumni, and its students are quietly working day in and day out to take on the most pressing challenges we face as a global community. I'm proud to be part of that tradition. Now, I've been asked an awful lot about my experience in the last couple months, so I'd like to take a few moments and share my experiences with you here tonight. I grew up in Sangerville, which is up by Dover-Foxcroft. My parents were public school teachers. We'd spend our summers down sailing the coast. It was from my love of the water that I became interested in the Navy. And although education is obviously very important to this family, financing college was difficult. I worked hard to earn the ROTC scholarship that would put me through Vanderbilt University, where I majored in physics and philosophy. And after graduating, I commissioned as an officer in the U.S. Navy and volunteered for submarine service. I spent 7 years on active duty as an officer in the Navy, and there I've had two very distinct experiences. As an officer on board submarines, I had to solve technical challenges while living in close quarters with people from all backgrounds and all walks of life. And I must say, living in a small tube with 110 other sailors provided a good precursor to the diplomacy training that I would receive later on. After my time in submarines, I was stationed at a civil military group in Eastern Africa, conducting civil operations. I was working with partner nations, building infrastructure, building capacity, institutional capacity, developing democracy overseas. It was there, in Africa, where I saw a man digging a ditch by hand into which he was laying fiber optic cable so he could connect his family, his friends, and his neighbors to the global community. And he could bring them into the 21st century. I watched a man in Africa, in what could graciously be called a developing country, display that same pride, that same work ethic that I knew growing up in Maine small communities. And while he was digging that ditch and laying that cable, my parents were still running dial-up. No one was digging them a ditch. In Africa, I was also assigned to work at the U.S. Embassy in Kigali, Rwanda. I was implementing U.S. foreign policy while building the relationships that strengthened both of our countries. And It's interesting to note that Maine's 2nd District is actually twice the size of the entire country of Rwanda. And although things might get a little cantankerous down here in Augusta, I guarantee you African politics is much worse. My experiences in Africa taught me really that the best way to promote democracy abroad is to practice it well here at home. So I've come home. My experiences taught me the need for diplomacy and have shown me the effects of well-written policy. My experiences drove me to study both of those things at 2 of the premier institutions for policy in the country. I spent a semester at the Muskie School for Public Policy here in Maine and 3 semesters at the Fletcher School for Law and Diplomacy. My time at a time here in America, when America is involved in resolving numerous conflicts overseas and is faced with turbulent domestic politics, I intend to bring a veteran's perspective to Washington. A perspective that is focused on problem solving and conflict resolution, not on gamesmanship or on trying to one-up my Republican opponents, who, although our political views may differ, are still my fellow Americans. If ever there were a time and a place where diplomacy was needed, it is now, and it is Washington. I've heard it said that if America were settled from west to east, much of Maine would just have been left as a national park. But that's not what happened, and so we Mainers instead have been living off the land and our natural resources for over 300 years. My father taught me, he taught 8th grade history, that the story of Maine has always been about the fish, the farms, and the factories. And, you know, it's just as true today as it was at the time of our settlement. And I am convinced that with the proper stewardship, our fish, farms, and factories will continue to provide for us. Furthermore, I believe that a greater focus on innovation and infrastructure can lead our, can expand our economy into new sectors, bringing with it the jobs we badly need, while we, as Mainers, can reasonably expect to enjoy these resources. They're not guaranteed. Our resources are threatened. Our cod stocks are dwindling, costing us jobs. Our lobster stocks are surging, driving prices down, costing us jobs. Our water in Poland, our famous Poland Spring, is now owned by a French company who bottles it and sells it to China. Our forests are threatened by ownership that is not nested or rooted in Maine communities. But worst of all, man-made climate change is real. It is here and it is now. We see this everywhere. We see this from the polar vortex to polar bears drowning from melting Arctic ice. This is no longer a problem for our children or our grandchildren to tackle. It is time for my generation to take responsibility and solve these problems. Growing up in Maine, I had the blessing of living with the clean air and the clean water that was provided as a result of Senator Muskie's hard work in the 70s. Others are not so blessed. In Africa, I saw the effect of dirty air and dirty water and unsanitary conditions. Can you imagine walking to an open-air market through the trash that has been just strewn out of your neighbor's window? Who can remember the sights and smells of garbage strikes? Well, in the village of Ali Sabia in Djibouti, I helped to establish a trash collection service that would remove litter from the streets, improving sanitary conditions of everyday life while providing jobs for the locals. It was a small thing, but it brought about a larger change. And we must do these small things everywhere here in America to bring about the changes that we all know need to be made. I have seen how ordinary people struggle with environmental challenges because their governments are incapable of organizing themselves to action. I work to solve those problems overseas, and I will solve those problems here at home. I will dedicate my efforts in Washington to dealing with the problems we face from man-made climate change. I will work with party leadership to effectively implement and achieve the energy policy changes that were outlined by the President in his State of the Union address. We must confront the old concept of a single fuel source with the reality that America's energy future depends on balanced production from renewable sources. This balance is achieved by implementing a regional focus, matching regional demand with regional renewable supply. One size no longer fits all in the energy realm. But we are already on our way. The efforts and innovations this state has made in clean energy technology and material science inspire confidence in the future. At the national level, however, we must insist that the language be changed from one of extraction to one of regeneration. And that language must be the one that we use to define our national energy policy. Working at both the state and the national level, we as the state of Maine were once so successful with our innovation on these issues that it was said, as goes Maine, so goes the nation. I grew up hearing those words. I know the power of those words. And I believe that it is time for Maine to once again lead the nation in solving the greatest problems of our time. I will work with my fellow Mainers to ensure that we preserve that sense of place that we find so unique and that we cherish so. I will bring a Mainer's work ethic to the halls of Congress for my family and my friends and my neighbors, no matter where they live. But I'm not saying anything new to you. We've been here before and we've led our way out. Senator Muskie showed us how we could face down these threats to our environment. But here in Maine, we have the wind and the sea to provide us with tidal power. Nevada has vast stretches of desert that they can use for solar energy, but our national energy policy must be flexible enough to meet the needs of all Americans, no matter what region they live in. But more importantly, we are entering an era where our use of energy is defined by how we harness and share an abundance of energy, as opposed to how we control depletable sources. While outdated corporate structures struggle to control the resources that are becoming more and more scarce, a new leadership is emerging, those who understand that shared resources and shared energy are the true path to prosperity. Again, my name is Alden Smith and I am running for United States Congress. I would like your vote and your support as we move forward. I'd like to thank you for listening and take questions along with Dr. Moomaw.
Sorry, I'm filling out my MC duties here. Do you want to kill that?
Sure.